Hi there. Today I'll be taking you on a short tour along this beautiful section of beach. The reason we're here is, well, England's always had, or Britain has always had, a relationship with people across the water, whether they are our invaders or whether they are our friends. We've always got structures and scars along all our coastlines to indicate our relationships with these neighbours. This tour will be taking you through the Second World War features along this beach, from the defensive structures of 1940 when we were worried about German invasion, over to our more offensive structures for British and Allied forces to move across to Normandy and fight our enemies on the beaches. Please follow me. Can you see this sort of a greyish looking triangle, upside down triangle just ahead of me here? Now, this was once actually a machine gun emplacement. 5 years ago, the full thing was here, but it's now actually collapsed and it's presently just down here on the sand. What we have here, we think it's a machine gun emplacement, but actually now it's so destroyed, it's a rough guess. But what was happening in the 1940s was there was a great big threat that Germany were going to invade. They were going to come to British shores. It was something serious, and it was something where we had to start protecting our shorelines and coasts. Here at Lepe, we have big searchlight emplacements, machine gun emplacements, all along this section. And it was to help stop an invasion coming from either the sea or from the sky. With this, there's not much left of it now, but we still have a distinctive scar from that time when we were being defensive and we were concerned. Keep up. You can see those two wooden structures in the distance. That's where we're making our way to. So when the British retreated from Dunkirk, British and Allied forces retreated from Dunkirk in 1940, there was a constant drive and thought as to how to return. How do you get your troops back into Europe? Because without that, there's no chance of winning a war. Now, the easiest way when you get to Europe to deploy your troops is on a landing craft. Amphibious assault is extremely good at deploying a lot of men, a lot of armaments at the same point, and then retreating from the beach, collecting more and bringing them back. The problem on the British side was we didn't actually have a system for loading up such men and armaments onto landing craft. And to give you an example, so we have a little landing craft here. And as a landing craft, you go onto the beach, you put down your bow doors, and then obviously your tanks and so on can go straight on. But at a British harbour or a British port, the problem is you have a harbour wall. And so a landing craft can't really do much, and the tank can't get on. And it can't even really go alongside and shift, and shifting and craning would actually be far too much, especially for the thousands of landing craft, armaments and troops and tanks, etc., that needed to get over for such a hefty and successful, hopefully, deployment. So we needed to harden our beaches, make our beaches much better at being able to receive landing craft and load our tanks and men. In order to do this, we had to harden some of our beaches. Now, an easy way to harden a surface is to use concrete, But concrete can take days to set, and in the intertidal zone, our tide here changes every 6 hours. There's no chance concrete could set in place. So instead, Major Vassal Steer Webster came up with an idea of the chocolate block. So pre-made blocks of concrete that can be laid out like a mat on a beach, temporarily, hopefully, for landing craft to come along, deploy their bow, put the tank on, and then all their men, and then go off out over to Normandy. As you can see here, there is still evidence of those chocolate blocks today. The nickname chocolate blocks, you'll see why in a minute. The chocolate block was an amazing piece of engineering, and it made a complete and utter difference to how the tanks and armaments could get onto a landing craft and then straight out. So here is the main part of a chocolate block hardening mat area. All of these, obviously, time has changed, the tides have turned, the blocks are slightly out of place, but as you look around, and the more you look, the more chocolate blocks you will see. Here's a whole chocolate block, and there's another one, and there's another one, and before you know it, you're actually surrounded by them. Each chocolate block was made from a wooden cast, so to speak. So you fill the wooden frame with all your concrete, let the concrete set, and then all these concrete blocks are taken out to your sites and laid. When they were laid, there's actually all through these chocolate blocks are metal hoops and hooks. You can just about see them on some places and some areas. Most of them have corroded away, but if you look really closely, you'll often see that there's a piece of concrete that's like a bit redder, or there might be actually even still a little bit of metal hanging out. But this is where they hooked onto each other and held in place. The original Mark I chocolate block actually was much more flexible than this because they thought it needed to flex with all the weight on top of it, but actually it flexed too much with the beach, and these were harder ones. So these are the Mark II chocolate blocks. And as you can see behind me, 2 dolphins are also here. When a landing craft, most notably for this area, LCT, so landing craft tank, so big landing craft, came up, they could pivot on these dolphins and come up the beach, hold position and wait for the tanks and armaments to be driven on from the concrete apron just there. And if you look up here, we can see that concrete apron up close, because again, a bit like the chocolate block, there was a hook and a hole system. So all the way along this section of concrete, you can still see all the hooks. These were the hooks that held on to the first section of the concrete apron, all the way down through the chocolate blocks, down out to where these dolphins are today. The chocolate blocks are actually only part of the structure and part of the story. You have these massive bollards like you can see behind me. You have the concrete apron here. Spring 1942 was the time to start that planning of how you can create these hardened beaches, the beach hardening mats, the concrete aprons, how you're going to steer everything, park everything. And remember, all the tanks were actually rolled in reverse, so that when they got to the beaches at Normandy, they could just be rolled straight out fighting and firing. So for this all to come about from its infancy of we need a harder beach, to this, which we have now, a fully functioning and loading landing craft platform, 8 months, job done. Okay, so now we're going to go on to the next site, which is just up here, and it's the final part of the story. So we've gone from the defensive positions over at the start of Lepe Beach to this, which is becoming a more offensive position, and how we can load and efficiently get or contribute, or this section can contribute to 150,000 troops coming over to Normandy. So the final bit, which was built again within 6 months of being planned and out to protect Gold Beach, and is the Mulberry Harbour sections. Off we go. classically with any concrete. If you've got concrete at home, in your garage, on a driveway, there's always a cat or a human that cannot help but walk across it before it's dried. This has been since the dawn of time, and we even have those marks here. If you see just here, we have footprints. Someone who couldn't wait for this concrete to dry before they stepped in it. As we see here, these footprints come all the way across and then back out. So I think it's someone who walked across and went, oh, they're sinking, and then dived off over this way. And if I put my foot here, I think they were about a size 7. Go and take a closer look. At the Quebec conference in 1943, Churchill and Roosevelt decided that not only do we just need landing craft to land troops, it's simply not enough. We need to use our other Royal Navy craft that are just regular ships. They can't use a beach to land. But over at Normandy, there was no real decent harbour that they could use, nowhere safe, nowhere that would take the size of what they need to do for not only the amphibious assault, but then the land assault onto Paris, then onto Berlin. So they needed a harbour, and they needed to build it. You can't build it over there, so they had to build it here. The harbour was called Mulberry, and the Mulberry harbour needed, first of all, you have several things for a harbour. You have your breakwater to stop all the waves coming in, to make the water quite calm, and then you need all your pontoons, etc. So your boats can moor up to them and then unload armaments and troops. This here at Lepe is one of those construction sites used to build parts of Mulberry. What they actually built was the Phoenix caissons, which are these great big concrete monoliths that went out and were placed all the way around to make the harbour wall, essentially to stop the waves crashing and make the water nice and calm. These concrete platforms for the Phoenix caisson construction site, I'm stood on one right now. There were actually 6 here, so they could build at the same time simultaneously 6 concrete monoliths. Each of these monoliths were then dragged by engines and tows and winches all the way down to a launching platform just down there that we'll come to later. With these platforms, as you can see, it's a huge amount of concrete. These were big pieces. You had what looks like a really large brick. But the really large brick is full of chambers. When they want to float this really large brick, all the chambers are pumped with air. When they want to sink it, as in sink it in place at Mulberry itself, then all these chambers are filled with water. But the other advantage to that is you can make this a secret operation, regardless of how big this site is and how big a Phoenix caisson is. This section is the Phoenix caisson launching slipways. What would happen is these great big concrete monoliths, once they are built on the platforms, they are then winched from concrete blocks. The concrete blocks are just over there. Those concrete blocks held engines. The engines held winches, ropes, bit of manpower, pulleys, everything else to haul those caissons all the way along to this point. At this point, onto these platforms here, they are then launched on these slipways, down and out to sea. They go out to either Southampton or Portsmouth for the final bit of the construction phase, and then sailed out to Selsey, where they're sunk and wait for their orders in D-Day, nice and secret. Added to that, it also provided an area, though this certainly area here provided a place where landing craft could then return with German prisoners of war, with wounded soldiers. One of those landing craft actually still survives today, and that's LCT 7074. If you ever go to D-Day Story in Southsea, 7074 stood outside the museum. That landing craft was here at Lepe Beach. The problem with coastal sites, no matter how hard or how strong they were, no matter how heroic they were and what they have done, there are some things they cannot fight. And one of those is climate change and coastal change. Now, although the sea, if you can just see there, it is at low tide, but the sea never actually laps the tops of these Phoenix caisson construction site platforms. And it's actually not, you know, if the sea rose, well, the Met Office said, oh, the sea level's going to rise by 2 centimetres every few years. It's like, well, 2 centimetres, so what, it's not much, it's not going to destroy the top. The problem with all of these structures is what's going on underneath. With these caisson construction sites, they were just built straight on top of gravel. And it's the gravel that's eroding out. With gravel scouring out from underneath, all these construction platforms start to collapse. This collapse you can just see here happened only last winter. This is getting much worse than when I saw it last year. There's one other thing that really is important for coastal sites as well, is we have a fixed point in time. I know this was built in December 1943. It's absolutely fixed. So if we want to monitor climate change, coastal changes, we have a fixed point we can do this from. So I can then say, oh, from this fixed point, the sea level will rise, oh, the high tide was to here, or to here, or to here, or to here. With that fixed point, we've got something to measure against. With, for example, if I didn't have this, if it was just open plain, or if it's just a field, there'll be no fixed point to measure anything against. It's harder to show and demonstrate sea level rise and climate changes. You cannot fight nature. It's just one of those things. So all we can do is record, enjoy, but also, unfortunately, let it go. For sites like this, although they are recent, for some people they are still within living memory, this is actually our last opportunity. The problem with a lot of sites we see is, oh, I wish I could see more, or I wish someone had written something down, I wish someone had drawn a picture. And I think for me in the future, me in 50 years, me in 100 years, me in 200 years time, will go, oh, I wish that person had recorded it. I wish that person had written something down. What is this? Is it ceremonial? To try and make sure interpretation is correct. The stories that we tell are kept as true to original as possible. The more we can record now before it's too late, the better.